Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of City Talk. This week, we are delighted to be joined by former Cork City legend and Hall of Famer Colin O'Brien. Welcome to the podcast, Colin. How are you?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, not bad. All good, thanks.
Good stuff, good stuff. So just to kind of give everyone a rundown of the podcast this week, we'll be taking a look through Colin's kind of illustrious career with Cork City, stemming from 1995 up to 2008. Is that right, Colin?
Yeah, I think 2008
Yeah,
was
thereabouts.
2009. Yeah, that season. Yeah.
Good stuff. And we'll also be looking at kind of Colin's life in all that, and also afterwards, and his role since then with the FAI and currently as Irish under-17 coach. So a lot of stuff to get into, kind of both, I suppose, on and off the pitch really, but just to get us cracking, Colin, how you've been fixed lately, you know, with COVID-19? Obviously, kind of must be difficult in your own role really, is, you know, scouting a lot of players, I'd imagine, and going watching a lot of games. It's been kind of ground to a halt really, has it?
Yeah, look, like everybody involved in the game that are on the ground and that are involved with teams at any level, you just lost all that contact, obviously. But there's been a lot of different aspects of the game as well that, you know, the last number of months that you've been able to do, maybe that you mightn't be able to be doing when you were actually involved full on with teams. So you kind of use this time to look into all of those and just be prepared and ready to go when the contact starts. But no, there's been plenty to keep me going with regards to planning and organising for the season ahead.
Yeah, and just before we jumped onto this call, you'd mentioned to me that you were kind of due to have another phase for the under-17 championships in March. Isn't that something that you'd missed out on? Obviously, you'd played the previous phase in Turner's Cross, which went really well, but missed out on that one.
Yeah, that was just a decision by UEFA that, you know, all the countries, you know, all the youth teams, both boys and girls, the 17, 19s, 21s, they were all cancelled. March is a big time for international football,
right?
As you probably know, at all the groups. We had a very successful campaign in Cork back in November 2019. And the group had qualified for the elite phase in March. Everything was ready to go to play in Scotland, but unfortunately, that got pulled. But, you know, it was the right decision with everything that's gone on in the world. And those players they'll move on now. You know, they'll be back with their, hopefully. The National League lads have been back the last couple of weeks. UK-based players will be getting going probably in August themselves, and they'll just be getting ready to go for the 18-19 season then, and we'll be starting with a new group of players.
Brilliant. And it just even to take it back to that, the phase that you had in Cork back in November, I think it was. How was that to kind of to manage the couple of games in Cork and have the matches out in Turner's Cross, a ground that you're hugely familiar with?
Oh, it was great. Look, it's a privilege to manage an international youth team and then to bring them to, you know, your home county.
Yeah,
it's an added bonus. You know, the fact, in my opinion, still Turner's Cross is one of the, you know, best grounds in the country, just regarding pitch, stadium. You know, there's always a good atmosphere there, a good place to come and watch a game. So the facility there it's really good for any level, but especially for an international 17, it's probably an ideal setup. And then we used Fota as a base, Fota Island Resort, which was a fantastic facility to use at the time as well. So, and, you know, we won the 3 games, topped the group, and, you know, it was a good memory.
Yeah, and it was good to see kind of Cork City player involved as well, Oren Crowe. So it's always nice to have local blood in the squad as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and Oren played. He was involved in all 3 games. He would have played he would have started the final game against Israel. He's been involved in the international setup since under 15. He's coming along nicely. I think the interesting part with that age group, what we had last year, was the swing of home-based players in the squad. You know, we between 12 and 14 home-based players in that group that took part in November. So it might be a sign of things to come in the future.
Yeah, and that's maybe something that we might get into kind of a little bit later on, that kind of transition for players. But I suppose even just kind of taking it back to right now, have you had any contact during the lockdown with those players? Would you have it for any reason? Or, you know, I know that you're kind of maybe due to have a new batch of players for next year, but would you still trying to I know there's been a lot of Zooms going on and stuff like that. Would you still kept in contact with, try to keep that kind of bit of communication to spot open?
Not throughout we'll say the pandemic. Paul basically said that the players move on. I would have spoken to all the squad that were say selected for the elite phase in March. Just outlined to them and just to reassure them where everything was at with regards to the international setup.
Yeah,
they'd be moving on from me and they'd be going into a new group. But I think who really takes the lead in that would be the clubs. Club coach, and it's been very encouraging to see how proactive the National League clubs have been with all their age groups. But said we're doing a lot of planning and looking at the players that are coming in now for next season. So that's how we try to use our time.
Excellent. And would it be a case that you might have some of those players that would maybe have an extra year with you next year? Is that generally the way it kind of works? Would you have a kind of a batch of half and half, or would it usually be 100% move on and 100% new squad coming in?
The higher percentage normally would be up to the age. We'd one player last year that's underage again this year. So we'll see where everything is at, where that player is at once they get back with the club and once we get back into the swing of things as well. The majority of the 95% of that group will move on to new staff.
Good stuff. And look, we kind of do the way we generally kind of run the podcast is we kind of come full circle really and kind of go back maybe to the start of your football career with Cork City and a long career at that. As I mentioned to you, some of the reasons that I was very interested in getting on the podcast was not just down to your kind of, I suppose, your role at the moment and the great work you've been doing over the last couple of years, but I suppose you spent what was the bones of kind of maybe 12, 13 years at Cork City. Very unusual kind of in the modern game really to be, I know you're the spell with Cove Ramblers, but I suppose a one-man club really, or a one club man. And, I suppose take us back right to the start. I think, did you play local football with Glasheen? And I think were you heavily involved in the GA as well, right up to kind of you joined City?
You've done a little bit of research.
A little bit. Yeah. There's not much on you, to be fair, now to get into, but I did dig out a little bit, all right.
Yeah, look, I suppose my own football career, it would have been all in Ireland. I suppose my schoolboy career growing up, I would have been a young lad, we'll say, influenced from the game of football, we'll say, in the early 80s. Right. That's where a lot of my influence came from, like the World Cup in Spain 82, the Mexico World Cup 86, Euro 88, Italian 90, that kind of...
That was your era, that was your prime era.
Yeah, had a huge influence. My role models, inspirations, all came from that within the game. Regarding locally, I would have started out my career with Glasheen in schoolboys football. Would have had a couple of years at Casement, would have went back to Glasheen, and then I joined Cork City Football Club. I think it was in 1993. I think people mightn't realise I would have played youths with Cork City. So had a youth team in the say the Cork Youth League at that time. And you had a reserve team also in the Munster Senior League. So
yeah, because that's something that people probably don't realise who follow the club right now, is that it was that's not that long distance ago that the youth teams and the reserve teams would have played in a local league really, rather than the now national leagues that they all play in. Like even, let's say, when I was there, you were playing against local clubs and stuff like that. At the time, just for people who mightn't be aware of the setup back then, like.
Yeah, and it was I suppose when you look back on it, especially the reserve league, because it was in the Munster Senior League. It come out of youth football. I suppose your aim when you were in the youth team was you're always sometimes you see the first team training, you go to watch them play. But I've always supported Cork City. From when they were founded in 1984, I go back that far as a supporter, watching the teams play at Flower Lodge. So that's it.
You're showing your age there, Colin.
I know. And then they would have went to Turner's Cross. So the players like in Flower Lodge, you had Barry Nealon, Ginger Healy, Pat. He would have grown up on my road. So when I was kicking a ball, I saw this person on my road that I lived in.
It was achievable.
So you're saying, well, that's doable.
Yeah, exactly.
So I suppose I just had that affinity to Cork. I would have played all sports, hurling, Gaelic football. You were able to play them all at the time because of the way the seasons were. You know.
Did I read right that you picked up an All Ireland minor medal with Cork? When you
Yeah,
would have been about 17, 18.
yeah, correct. Of an All Ireland, yeah.
So was that a kind of another possible road that you could have taken?
Yeah, I was at the time because I played Gaelic with Bishopstown and I was involved with Cork City at the time. It probably came to that stage though where it was quite demanding to try and keep it all going. And you know, I always had an ambition to try and play with Cork City first team and see where football would take me. That was my number one aim, and that's what I went for.
Yeah, was football, was soccer, I suppose. Was it always the kind of the number one sport for you growing up playing?
It was, yeah, it was always to me like it was always. But I think it was just in that time was great. It was like just sport was 12 months of the year for you.
Yeah.
It was a brilliant time to grow up. Do you know what I mean? Like it was really good memories and real good education because you were doing something 12 months of the year regarding sport. You know,
you do hear sometimes there's the best players like that come in whatever line of sport would be multi-sport players when they're growing up because you can get a lot of attributes from the different sports. Let's say Jay probably helps you maybe with the physical side of it or whatever it might be like. You know, did you find that yourself?
I did, yeah. There was that crossover. Do you know what I mean? Kind of toughen you up a bit as well. Side of the game, but I just think the fact you were active for the 12 months, it was great. You know, when the football, you know, when your schoolboy season finished, you'd go in and there'd be months where you might play Jay. Jay would finish, you'd be back into your schoolboy or your youth setup.
You're flying fit then, really, like, aren't you?
Yeah. You weren't probably playing as many games, weren't probably training as much, but then, you know, at that younger age, what I said, you would have learned everything really on the road or on the street or down the local green. That's where you did all your training really.
Yeah, absolutely. So you come into the city then, as I said, and just kind of going back to the reserve team in the Munster Senior League. That's obviously something that has been kind of spoken about recently amongst a lot of kind of ex-city players in particular, and I've seen that the club would have kind of investigated that a number of years back and it wasn't a possibility. Do you think it would benefit kind of players now in between the 19s and first team level kind of to bridge the gap a little?
Hugely, yeah. Like, you know, and it's not been, you might think you've been biased here. It's the fact, for me, it played a huge part in my development.
Yeah.
Because I was probably one of these players, you know, growing up, and you know, I wasn't the biggest in my team. I wasn't the best player in my team. But, you know, I could read the game. I had an understanding of the game. I could use both feet. I had a little bit of pace. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, I got a bit of a growth spurt, maybe that kind of at the end of 17, early 18. And when I went into the Munster Senior League side, you know, sometimes you come out of a youth player, of the youth division, and, you know, you think, you know, why am I maybe around the first team?
Yeah.
You know, you get a bit of reality check. You know, I remember playing Munster Senior League games and it was an eye opener. You know, I thought it was fit. I had another bit to do. You were playing against, I know, you know, the local Cork teams. They always wanted to PC you. They wanted to beat you. You want these young lads coming in for Cork City reserves winning. So there was a real competitive edge.
Yeah.
So it was a good grounding for me. I found that a massive benefit and kind of made me look at the areas I had to improve on myself and gave me that extra kind of year or two development.
Yeah, they're pivotal years, like, aren't they? Really, kind of between 18 to 21, like, and it's probably a bit of a lost gap at the moment, like, isn't it? Because you obviously have your exceptionally talented players, which will probably be maybe sniffing around the 17, 18. They're in around the first team and possibly playing. But there's a huge percentage of players as well that don't develop until their early 20s, really. Like, and, you know, we've seen a lot of players that have gone on to fantastic careers after, you know, who are late developers and so on. So it's a quite difficult one at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I suppose what we didn't have then, I suppose the argument is we didn't have all, you know, you would have just went to Cork as a youth player. So you weren't at Cork the way it is now at 13s or 15s.
Yeah.
So I think the whole aim is those, you know, over time, those players.
Shining them through, like.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no guarantee. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, percentages will come through. But I do think, though, definitely when players are, that 17 to kind of 19 bracket, if they're not around the first team, that they need stronger games, some of them. And sometimes being put in against players a little bit older, a bit more competitive. You find a little bit more out about the players themselves. And the player will find out a little bit more about themselves too.
Yeah, great point. So it obviously kind of worked out well for yourself coming through that system, and then you kind of got fed into the first team. And I kind of touched on it a while ago. You kind of, I suppose, you dipped into two separate eras really at Cork City. That kind of the late 90s era where you had the likes of, John Caulfield, Pat Morley, Patsy Frayne, Kelvin Flanagan, Derek Colin, all in the late 90s. And then I suppose moving on then to, your 2004, 5, 6, 7 team. Talk us through those periods completely really, and what it was like in those teams in the late 90s, kind of coming through then to Pat Dolan eras and the Rickos and so on.
Yeah, I suppose saw a lot. Great education again. Some real interesting characters we met along the way. I suppose the first point I'd probably make would, 1995 was when I made my debut. I think that's something you'll never forget as a player.
Yeah.
Because big milestone, something you were working towards. And the late Rob Highmarsh was manager at the time.
Right.
So he, you never forget the manager either who gave you that chance.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the first team, that is. And,
Yeah.
And I have to mention, like, my reserve team manager at the time, he's passed away as well, John Donovan, my youth team manager, Pat Kelleher. They had huge influence because they would have been the people, trying to make you believe, pushing you to try and get into that first team. So when you did get the break, I made sure I was going to take it. It was the club were at a very difficult time as well when I got that opportunity, because we were lingering towards the bottom end of the table.
Do you think that, I spoke to Garrod a couple of weeks ago, and the whole around the Forest time when they took over in 2010, even though it was an extremely difficult time for the club, it actually probably was a good thing for him as a younger player because it gave him time to establish himself in the team at such a young age. Did you find that yourself at the time as well?
Yeah, I suppose that's the point I was going to make with it, because like you kind of come in as a young player, you don't really know the inner workings of a football clubs or the difficult. Yeah. That's not really in your mindset. You go training, you want to get in the team, how you get in the team, and then you get in there, and whether we were down at the bottom or up the top, I mightn't have got a chance if we were higher up the league.
Yeah, absolutely.
At particular time. So yeah, I'd agree with that. There is opportunity when the club itself might be going through a difficult time for younger players, and they should always look at it that way. So that's how I got my chance. We were away to UCD, played right back that night. I just made sure that I can still remember it, that I was going to have a real good performance. That's what my aim was for. Declan Daly was playing right side of centre back. I was playing right back, and
not a bad person to have looking after you.
Absolutely, and I suppose that's where those kind of players around you then they were kind of they really helped with your development then. But that the thing transferred from that UCD game was that we had an eligible player playing, and
it wasn't you by any chance, is it?
3 points. Who was it? It was a Paul Wimbledon, I think was his name. Yeah, we'd a few lads over from England in that team now. Yeah, the club was going through a big change
or something like that. Was it?
There was something to do with that. Something to do with some paperwork, or wasn't signed up properly. Lost the 3 points, but I still got my debut from that game, and I think the following season, I think Dave Barry then took over the club.
Right, playing right back there for that game. It's obviously not something that you'd be known for. Would you find yourself kind of a versatile player when you were younger? Because obviously you'd be more known to maybe playing central or right wing, right full. How would you find that?
Yeah, I suppose I was. I probably, growing up, I would have played some of the full back positions and midfield, yeah.
And is that something that you're conscious of as a coach now, that, not probably pigeonholing players? I suppose you do look after a lot of younger players in like that 16, 17 age. It's kind of you're still kind of finding your feet really, like in regards to positions and stuff like that, because they're still developing. Do you find that kind of influences your coaching now?
Yeah, I think it definitely gives you a better reading of the game and better understanding of positions, or if you work in systems, and if you're giving players points or education, that you have a good knowledge of it yourself. Yeah, I think it's a big help. I suppose, look, younger players, you get that mix with younger players. Some of them really are want their identity. They're very clear on their position, and then you players that are versatile, which from an international point of view is a huge help.
Right.
It really can be when you're selecting the squad. But going back to the Cork bit, when Dave took over, he just really made an impact then of kind of changed around. He brought that, I suppose, to use the term, that Corkness back. We got Patsy Frame back into the squad. Ollie Carroll, even though from Tipperary, was signed. Kelvin Flanagan was signed. Stephen Napier was there. Caulfield was there at the time. Pat Morley was still there. So a lot of
had a local feel to it.
Gareth Cronin was involved. Phil Harrington had come back and involved in the setup. So immediately when you went back pre-season and all these people were there, you get a good sense of pre-season. Do you know what I mean?
I think you do, yeah.
Where things are at, and a lot of people I mentioned there would have had a big influence on me then regarding the game. And,
what age would you be then, Colin? I suppose in around that kind of 96, 97 period. You still
2021ish.
Yeah, so like to be in the mix with the likes of Patsy and all them, like it must have been, you must have learned a huge amount. And I know the lads were like, Joe, even a few weeks ago, he was saying the training. Billy was saying the same training at that time. It mightn't have been the lads' had jobs and stuff like that in the evenings, but they trained properly and it was tough going, I'd imagine.
Yeah, like it was that where you train Tuesday, Thursday. So you played a lot of Sundays because probably a generation here looking in, there wasn't many teams with floodlights, believe it or not. Like I think that might have been one of the teams, or Dalymount Park possibly. I think they were the two. But a lot of the games were played Sunday, so that was your schedule. Tuesday was always a hard one. Thursday, Saturday, believe it or not, we done some Saturday sessions now. If they were, they were kind of wondering, was the game going to be called off? Dave used to join in those sessions, and when we played certain games, you had to play to win. You wanted, next goal wins, and that could take 15 minutes with the quality on the pitch. There was a lot of lads there would have had a big influence on me and helped me a lot, but both on and off the pitch. You know what I mean? They've been really, really good that way.
And was football your kind of? Were you going to college? Was it just football you were playing at the time, or was it just you? Or were you working, or how were you kind of balancing all that at the time? Because obviously it wasn't straight up full time at that time.
Yeah, I suppose I was never full time. You know what I mean? I never had a full time contract. You might have had a full time mentality, but no, I was working. I always worked and played. Put it that way. So that was the kind of. That was the system I kind of came into, and as you said there, in that 90s.
It would have been the norm, really, like with most of the squad.
Yes. Yeah. I'd say it was kind of class part-time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you.
The quid wasn't a whole lot. No, that wasn't probably the whole issue for me at the time. I was trying to break in and see where this would go. And so that team really developed then into kind of that, 97, 98, 99.
Yeah. And you won the FAI Cup in 1998, was it? But before we get into that, what like even around that age, was there ever an opportunity or come up to maybe go play in England or anything like that, or was it kind of, did you find maybe that was your level and that's what you were fighting for? Or, did any opportunities ever arise like that?
There was an opportunity on the horizon when it was kind of that 98 season. We're having a very good season actually. Ollie Cahill was on one side, I was on the other. It was kind of that 97, 98, and probably I remember I ended up getting a bad knee injury before the semi-final of the cup. I actually done my cruise here. But there was something in the pipeline to be going to. It was Middlesbrough actually at the time that wanted to take myself and Ollie. At the end of the season, that they wanted to have a look at us. That was really the only opportunity kind of that I knew that was kind of, we'll say, in the pipeline. But that kind of we were kind of out of action for, I say, about 6 or 8 months though from that stage. So we kind of just got back into getting yourself right, trying to get back a contract really with Cork. That's what you were playing for as well at the time, like, you know.
Yeah, I get you. And they did cruciates back then. It was a lot more of I suppose it's still a serious injury, but like it was nearly known as a potentially career-ending injury back then, I'd imagine, was it?
That's exactly how it was always nearly put to you, Paul. Yeah. Because it was very new, or you know, there was a lot of, I suppose, different aspects of medical research, and people have to, you know, their career ended because of it. And but I suppose I was fortunate then in one way at the time, because not that it was wholesale, but it was beginning to get probably
a bit more popular.
Yeah, and the treatment of it began to, you know, probably get a lot better. Like I remember when it actually happened, and the doctor at the time, you know, I was probably, when it happened, we were about a month away from the cup semi-final, and I remember getting it done just maybe after the cup semi-final. So there was 6 weeks to the cup final, and the scope in your knee first just to have a look. Right. I remember saying, listen, like, good news and bad news to you. Like he said, the good news is you should be able to play in the cup final, but the bad news is you've done your cruciate.
Jeez, 6 weeks, is it?
I was trying to figure that one out.
Recovery.
So yeah, but there was that time again. They were probably all learning with it as well. There was that kind of theory that if the muscles were built up around the knee, we'll say, that there could be a chance that you could play, you know, a one-off game. And I gave it a go. You know what I mean? I got the knee back to. I remember Dave saying to me, "Look, you got to make the squad for the last game before the cup finals." We actually qualified for the cup finals, as you know, in '98, and then won it. But it was a case. I remember we were up in Talca Park. I made the bench, and at halftime, just knocking the ball with one of the other substitutes, and the knee just buckled underneath me. So that was me then, just right. Okay, this needs to.
Obviously, a great win for the club in the FAI Cup. Was it a bit of a bittersweet moment for yourself due to the injury, or did you really still feel a part of it with the win?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, look, you're playing a cup. Yeah, look, you'd be disappointed.
That's just the players' mentality, really, like, isn't it? You know, like.
Yeah, of course. But like, you know, I know I would have had a good season that year. I played right up to the quarter final. You know, it was a season. I think I had 7 or 8 goals scored from the wing, lots of assists. It was just one of those seasons. You know, you're really, really doing well as a player.
Yeah.
But you know, Derek Colin, you know, it was his moment then in the replay. And you know, that'll always be remembered. But I suppose the year before that, just I suppose even going back when we'd won the League Cup.
Yeah, okay.
So that was kind of, that's what I'm saying, that.
Stone.
Yeah, exactly. So we won, that final actually was played in Turner's Cross, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember winning, you know, when we won it, that connection then, you know, with the supporters, and you know, Noel Hartigan was playing that day, Derek Colin was playing that day. There was, you know, there was a real Corkness to the group. You know, that's the thing on the point with Dave, you could kind of see it come into fruition then, you know what I mean? And a couple of lads from other parts of Munster then, and Dave Hill then coming in, you know.
Yeah. It is like, you even see over the success, even around 2017, there was always a strong core Cork spine to the team. Like, wasn't there? With, like, even say it was Nults, Benno, Garrod, Bucks, Marky Sull. You know, there was always a strong Cork contingent in the teams. Like, wasn't there when the club had successful times?
Without a doubt, yeah. If you go back through the history, like, you know, the team that won it in league in '93, and the winning team, I've involved myself in 2005. And I think that then brings that connection as well, you know. But you know, there was quality in all of those squads as well. Yeah. There really was.
And I suppose moving on then into the kind of early noughties, really, and I think Liam Murphy would have been the manager at the time, and I think that's kind of when things started to kind of maybe go on an upward trajectory into bigger things, really, like, you know, and with the likes of, we spoke to Georgie last week, John O'Flynn, kind of a new, fresh, young talent coming through. You were kind of, would you have been kind of hitting your prime around that age? Were you 27-ish? Or what was your kind of place in that transition, I suppose, really?
Yeah, I suppose I'd have been still in mid-20s, Liam came in and the club was beginning to, there was that kind of trying to push on, even regarding facilities and
yeah,
and I think there was that push. Then you had the likes of Shelburne and Bowes, and
yeah,
Pats were probably later in the 90s, but there was that kind of, we'd say, competition between definitely 3 or 4 clubs trying to be that number one, that everyone was trying to improve everything on and off the pitch. Really, you could definitely see that change. Yeah, I suppose when the likes of George and John were signed, and Dan Murray came in at that stage.
Yeah.
And there was I suppose that changeover. You could see then the likes of like Decky's retiring, John's, Pat.
It's a change of the guard, really. Like, was it?
That's it. Yeah, exactly. So you just, these lads were coming back from being in the UK. And I suppose they'll probably try to take on the role as well of, you're kind of okay, make sure, right, some of them are Cork lads, but make sure they still understand that, not to be looking at it as a step down, like, but that this could be another step in your career, and there's good people in the club, and you've high standards in training. You try and make sure all of that.
Was the kind of, I suppose, any targets yourself that you possibly had of going across the water or whatever it might have been, were they kind of diminished at this stage? You were obviously working maybe with the FAI by this point. Was that your kind of focus, or was there everything in the back of your mind maybe about going across the water? Was that ever a huge ambition of yours, or were you kind of content fighting it out at City?
Yeah, I suppose it was just, you'd be kind of beginning to, with that mid-20s, you're kind of looking beyond your career. Well, I can't speak for a player, but you're definitely looking a little bit beyond your career. Yeah, you're right. I'd started a development officer role in the FAI. It was a complete new role. It was football. Different sides of it. So I was able to work. I was still able to play at a good level. And that's really that's where I kind of just kept me focused on that. I was able to do both.
And Billy, we had Billy on a couple of weeks ago, who I suppose would have been in a very similar situation to yourself, and he always found like he really wanted to have that kind of balance outside of football as well. Was that kind of the same as for yourself, or was it more out of necessity rather than, because I suppose in Billy's point of view, he wanted a different focus outside of football rather than, was it with yourself, it's similar, or was it you just kind of, I suppose you're taking it the bigger picture really?
Yeah, well, I suppose, well, if the focus out of football, I know I get totally what it means with that, and you hear a lot of players speak like that as well. But I was still involved in football, from the side of playing. But my job was
also football as well.
But it was a very, I suppose, maybe how I perceived the job, that how it was going to be when you started it.
Right.
Probably nothing like it when you actually did, because it was a huge education for me regarding all strands of the game and different aspects of the game. Like, this wasn't just about coaching when you went in as a development officer role. It was trying to develop the game in all, genders, areas of it,
grassroots, schools,
the whole lot, education side of it, development side of it. There was no real, the way at the time, in the country, there was no real national programs. So in one way, it was a real brilliant. It was a blank canvas, trying to develop all these kind of ways.
Put your own stamp on it.
Yeah, and see what's going on in other countries and in your own country, and try and bring them into your own region. But I probably would have been that kind of personality as well, or individual, Paul. I would have needed to be doing something.
Right. Okay.
I'm not sure how I would have managed finishing
solely focused on training, matches, recovery, whatever.
I would have been working. You've been going work, train. You come back, you might have something to do with work that evening. You have very little time to reflect or think, to be honest. You might have played on a Friday night. The lads are doing the recovery on a Saturday. You get that done, and you're off to something in Saturday afternoon and Sunday as well, possibly. Yourself. The weekends are busy time at all levels of football. But no, I had no regret with that. I would have found I needed that.
Excellent. And I suppose, did you see things changing during that period then at the club? Things maybe getting a little bit more professional. Obviously a lot of the players would have been going more professional around that time. How did you find that kind of, as I said, that transition really?
Yeah, I suppose that would have been the time when Pat Dolan took over, really, and Brian as chairman, Brian Lennox, did so much for the club at that time. I think people don't realise.
Yeah.
I mean, they do that would have been involved, but I would have seen it probably firsthand, and he really wanted to make a push for us to get champions, and he made a big statement in appointing Pat Dolan as manager. They had that 3-year plan, that 3-2-1 model.
Pat, and it was almost executed, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, they spoke about that. They made it very aware to the squad of players at the start that this is the way they were looking to go. I remember them being very clear of outlining a might before everybody. I found it very refreshing. I was probably at that age, 27, 28. It was probably easier to count the players now that were after 1 year with Pat. It was probably easier to count the players that were part-time.
Okay. I'd say probably yourself, Billy, very few others, is it?
Billy Gordon would have been there, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There just would have been a handful of us, and it was gone very, players are training full-time now.
Billy said that he accommodated, at the same time with training sessions, maybe early evening and stuff like that. He was obviously still, very keen on keeping you involved and around the team, which is probably a compliment to yourselves, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it was that. I suppose he knew there was probably still something to get from us, and there was experience there as well.
Yeah.
Probably knew the characters we were, and maybe said what we could still give to the club. Yeah. So I think it was good. We say management from Pat's side as well, but it was a very interesting time to see it all just happen like that. One season, there's a handful of lads full time. The next season, then it's a handful of lads part time.
Yeah, I get you. Colin Tremendous O'Brien, I think Pat christened you. Did that mean you were one of his favourites at the time, or how did that come about?
You know what? Well, very interesting. I know that's as time went on, I had to earn my place in the team. There was no giving with Pat. Like I suppose when Pat first took over, there was I remember I'll never forget it. There was something we were training close to Stefan Nefe. I was working. I think I was 5 minutes late. Something happened coming. Anyway, you just can't be late. Like it's just not acceptable. But I was, and I remember I didn't see action for. I was on the bench, but I didn't kick a ball in Pat's first season for about 12 games.
Oh, right.
So
think it was down to that.
I think he was looking at a lot of things. I think he was assessing a lot of the club.
Yeah.
I'd never hold him to that, but still trained. But it was a big. It was kind of a left saying, right, okay, this is the way things are going to be. Like, you know what I mean? This is.
Yeah. It's putting down a marker.
Yeah, they really see, and you could see it with other things around it. Regarding everything, the whole preparation. The whole culture, the way it's called now.
And obviously in a positive way, really. Like, because I spoke to Joe, and even like you're talking about from inside the squad, but as a club as a whole, like Pat was like the marketing manager, really, like around the time wasn't he? He was in. You'd see him on the paper every day, and he was pushing the Rebel Army and the people getting involved. And I think Pat was involved in the jersey change in colour from the GA separate and that kind of stuff. So he had a huge stamp on it, like, didn't he?
He did, Paul. Yeah, he did, and it was very, it was so noticeable around the city and county.
It was actually, and I'd say it would have been 12, 13 maybe at that time, probably like yourself, you said when you were that age, kind of going to the games, it would have been similar for myself, and you'd seen a huge transition, I suppose, publicly, really, around that age. Like, it was a real, he was kind of gathering the audience, really, whereas maybe the years previous, you would have had the same kind of punters going to the games, and maybe fellas that would have came off the previous clubs and stuff like that, but he generated no audience for the club, really, like, didn't he?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. You know what I mean? And he was, Brian really, he gave them that,
Yeah,
backing exactly to go and do that. And but you could, as a player, you just knew when you were coming into something, okay, there's something going on here. I like it. Also then, okay, George was beginning to find his form. Flynn was there, and he brought Kevin Doyle as well with him.
Yeah.
A little bit unknown at the time from same
Absolutely, time.
Again, when you even trained with Kevin at that time, you could see the rawness there, but you could also see something I like hearing this lad. And again, fit it in brilliantly to the whole setup within Cork. So that it was a brilliant time, because we then started. I don't think I was ever as fit. You had to accommodate us, look after yourself. There was better support around the team regarding what you might have needed. Regarding the gym or nutrition.
Yeah.
As a player, you appreciate that, and you feel you're being looked after here, and you think people are caring for you, and you do give that extra bit in yourself. And I think it was a big driving factor within the squad of how successful we were. And then, of course, memory of signing Joe Gamble, Danny Murphy. It was just a really, really good group of players. And Liam Carney popping up on the wing, and you just
you just think back on the team that was there then. It was a phenomenal squad, really, wasn't it, in that era, 2003-4 to 2008, really, there was that core of players there. It was probably underachieved, really, is the consensus from the guys over the last couple of guys that I had that was involved in that era as well. I know you won the league and the cup, Santa Cup maybe, but for the team that you had, it probably underachieved a little, didn't it?
Yeah, we definitely probably said, you would have liked to have won another couple of leagues for sure. I think at that time it would have been, that 2003, 2004 time, I suppose. Shelbourne it was ourselves and Shelbourne very, very strong. And then Drogheda after 2005, you know what I mean? When they beat the cup, they then began to push on a bit. You'd everyone tried up standards in those 2 or 3 teams, and that's what made it so competitive and so to win that second league, we'd say. But we had a phenomenal European run, some brilliant memories there on and off the pitch, and I suppose highlighting it then when there was a change in the managerial setup for 2005, but a lot of the squad was still in place, and it was a great occasion then to actually win the league.
Brilliant. And we'll come on to that, but how did you find the transition from, I suppose, Pat left obviously just before the season was due to start in 2005, and then Rico came in? How did you find the change? Because it's been a bit of a topic of conversation and this over the last couple of weeks of, I suppose some players kind of drew to the way Pat was doing things, and some players probably drew to the way Rico was doing things. How did you find it yourself?
I thought it was, how would I say, it was, I think, I suppose Damien has to get, I know Pat built the squad for those 2 years. And when, I'd have worked, I remember just going back quickly as a youth player, with Damien was manager at the time as well. So, being involved in 1 or 2 of his training sessions, had an idea about him. But I think he was definitely the right person at the right time, because he showed all his experience. I remember in the early couple of months, it was a tricky handover because there was a bit of conflict within the group at the time, and a lot of players didn't like what was happening. But you're a player, you're under contract, and you gotta, you know what I mean. If you're under contract to the club, you got you're a professional player. But slowly, you could see it then beginning, 1 or 2 changes. But slowly, Damien had his way with training, his way of playing, but he still had to manage it. And I think, the choppy bit at the start, I think we got over that. Winning matches helps it. Getting off to a good start in the league helped it. Separating ourselves from Shelbourne, that was probably, that was the team we were really trying to, get ahead of. And we'd gone way out ahead of them in the first series of games. And or actually, Derry then came out of, Stephen Kenny's Derry. We're like, well, where are they coming from? They're still on our coat here. yeah. So that's they were also competing at that season. But no, I just thought Damien managed it really well when he came in, and once it settled down, and the players then as you do, you kind of say, all right, we have to, we're going to try and win a league here. That was our aim.
And you went on to do so. It was sealed up in the last night of the shed in Turner's Cross against Derry, first against second. It was an unbelievable night, wasn't it? To top it off.
Yeah, it was like the season itself. That's what I was saying. It was an incredible season because you're still competing in Europe. We were still in the cup. We got to the cup final that year as well. Probably come to that point as well at some stage. There was just matches there that year that I felt were defining moments, during the season, because as I said there a while ago, Derry weren't going away, so it was Derry now are going to be a real, it's going to be Shells or Derry. That's the way it was looking. Shells just weren't having they were drawing a lot of matches. I think we were halfway through the season. I think we were 17 points clear of Shells. But Derry and ourselves were neck and neck. But there were certain points that year. I remember there was a game. For me, it was a game in between the European matches that year. We played Drogheda away, and sometimes when you're in Europe, you have a league game and then you have a European game, and sometimes it's just missed. Maybe, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember we went up, because sometimes your performances were a bit erratic after Europe. You could have a really good European performance, come back into a league game and draw. You know what I mean? You might draw against Ray or UCD, and that can hurt you at the end of the season, which it did in previous. But I remember we won those games midweek between European, especially
and you even see it. I suppose people would be more familiar with watching Premier League teams, but it happens constantly, doesn't it? You see a team maybe in the Europa League playing Thursday, Sunday, then the results go downhill really, don't they, in the league? Yeah,
and it really hurts you then for the running. But it was just that win. That was always the standout game to me. I remember, the game. You couldn't say much about the game.
Paul Doolan, the manager of Drogheda at that time.
I think he was. Yeah. I think Paul was. Yeah.
He'd have the team set up well in that, I'd imagine.
And they were up and coming as well. You know what I mean? They were in that top four. They were. You see some of the signings that he was making, and they were pushing to go full time as well at that time.
Yeah.
But I think George scored that day, and I think we won 1-0. But I just remember thinking to myself from previous experiences, going geez, there's
something different there.
Yeah. And then the way it transpires, you go into your last home game of the season, and Derry are ahead by 2 points.
I know.
It's a cup final for us,
but it was written in the stars, really, wasn't it? Home game last night in the shed. It couldn't have went any better. It was,
It was an amazing night. Yeah. It was an amazing night, and as you said, the place was packed, and the quality of the goals and some of the performances, and once John O'Flynn, Roy Donovan crosses that one,
he settled you down, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But it was. I remember even looking. I think Derry, Paddy McCourt, best of my memory. He
came on.
Yeah, he didn't start that night. I remember that kind of saying, "What's very unlike Stephen." At that time, I was thinking, what was going on in the background?
Of course, was he fit or what?
It's kind of when you're looking, okay, are they thinking, we're a little more conservative here? Well, I just remember leading up that week of training, there was just that whole sense in training and that edge to everything we did. So I know it might be easy to say, but I just knew we weren't going to lose the game.
Yeah. I think that feeling was all around the city, really, wasn't it? It was just set up really,
Yeah, there was brilliant atmosphere in the ground that night, and the scenes after, and it's just a real highlight.
And you touched on it then, the cup final obviously was a disappointment, probably triggered from over celebrating maybe a long awaited league.
Yeah, the cup final. I think that'd be one we missed. Personally, was saying, right, this is you're trying to get the point. The players that listen, this is a huge opportunity about trying to get the double.
players got caught up in the moment maybe of the league and took an eye off it?
Well, I think at the time, Paul, I think, correct me here if I'm wrong, no, but I think there was a 2-week gap. Was that right? Between the last league game and the cup final?
Yeah.
Like, I was always maintaining nearly, you know what, if the cup final was the following weekend,
you would have hopped into it, like.
Yeah, I would have think, right, you might have had your night, you got yourself sorted out then. And
I get you.
You wouldn't have had time to, it's very hard to keep an eye on all the players that week after the cup final. But there was also, I don't know players, I wouldn't, we still trained well, and there was still that, appetite and professionalism to go and win the game. There was a lot of, I think there was definitely 3 players. Damien had to make a few changes in that game as well.
Yeah.
We're actually missing. I think Joe was suspended. Joe Gamble was suspended for the final. I think Roy Donovan was. There was one more now. Might have been Danny Murphy, actually.
Huge losses.
Yeah, 3 down. But I think the plus, though, with that squad, though, I think what I've always been confident was that we still, every time someone was out, we had a very good squad. You know what I mean? With 17, 18 players, that if someone was missing, someone could come in. I think that was a huge plus with that 0-5 score. 0-4. But I think, there was a few changes made in that game that were unlike Damien. He was very like for like in those matches, and there was a few. I think Billy went back and played. Did Billy Woods go back and play left back in that game? And I think Greg might have come in and played, like O'Halloran come in, but there was just something. We were unfortunate that day as well. But I would always probably thought, if the timing was a week before week after the league final or the league last game itself, probably
would have put you in better stead.
I think it would, personally. But that's history,
Absolutely. And even coming into the next couple of years then under Damien, you had some fantastic European runs, and then again the winning the FAI Cup in 2007. I suppose you could say 2005 to 2007 ended that, whatever the 3 years seasons, I suppose, kind of went smoothly enough. And then obviously there was a bit of trouble hit again at the end of 2007, but not something that you've never seen before, put it that way. After your it was kind of similar to the way you kind of came into the team, really, like, wasn't it? It was kind of coming full circle again.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good way of putting it. Again, a couple of really good years, and Damien started, then there was changes, players were leaving the club. Again, that whole transition again, Colin Healy was signed, Gareth Farr was signed, remember Ian McSweeney coming in. So
did you find you were still having a very important, like, you played a lot under Rico, like, really, didn't you? And did you find your role still the very important cog in the team at that time, or did you see yourself where did you see yourself at during that period, I suppose?
Yeah, I suppose I still felt that plenty to offer, plenty to contribute, and I suppose as you do get into that, your late 20s, early 30s. I think the managers know you at that stage, what I mean, the character, and I think a lot of it is just about, your recovery, and you're looking after yourself. You really know yourself, you know what I mean? You know the body inside out, what you need to be doing. So there's a real trust probably between yourself and the management staff. But it was still very much, the players are very much in that full-time mode, and Damien again, the same as Pat was, they accommodated, but we still I probably only missed one training session a week, Paul. Do you know what I mean? Like, I suppose from the job.
Because I know that when Billy was playing under Rico, he used to train in the evenings with the under 21s. You still made the proper sessions generally? Did you? I know you're all, but the FA is probably flexible, which might be allowed to do that rather than say Billy's 9 to 5 or whatever it might have been like.
Yeah, very much so. So there were certain mornings you could train in the morning. You'd work your afternoon and evening then.
Yeah.
That's just that was the trade-off. But the way I never looked at that as a major issue, because I knew it wasn't going to last forever, and it was just you need to try and get what you can out of this now.
Yeah.
And they were winning the cup in the RDS. Dennis Bean.
Big Denny. Denny's been a popular topic on this podcast over the last couple of weeks. And great stories from. I was saying that we need to get him on soon to get a bit of retribution against the lads, but then he was a great character, like, wasn't he, around the dressing room and all that? He was the life and soul of the place, like.
Yeah, he's good. Yeah, good lad. And yeah, I think he probably needs to defend himself a little bit. But yeah, I know he scored the cup winner in 2007, and he'll always go down in history for that.
He deserves it. So, like, I suppose you're moving on then to kind of, that was kind of really, was that the end of it then for you properly at City? Now, I know you hadn't officially left the club, but Alan Matthews came in then, and I know one of the guys was speaking a couple of weeks back, and there was just huge numbers and all that kind of stuff. Like, did you feel you were getting petered out even more as a part-time player then at that stage?
Yeah, like, I think, there was a lot of change. Said management change, and then behind this, the whole thing with investors change. So it was just nothing that you hadn't seen before. But it was a case of I never had any problem or falling out with Alan. I gave it 6 months. But that's what I said to myself. I still felt I was training well.
Yeah, what age were you then, Colin? Actually,
I would have gone into the 30s now at this stage. Yeah. So I've been early 30s, but still feeling really good. Do you know what I mean? Still good in the testing, still good in the runs. But there's still, it was a lot of players were still full time at the club at the moment. As you said, there was a bit of changing, all right, of players, which will happen. But yeah, I just got to that stage, I suppose. Also, in my own job, I went into a different role. I went into I was working as a development officer. Then a role came up in the association. It was a player development coach. It was a national position, and you are looking that little bit ahead as a player all the time. Yeah. Exactly, but when you're a part-time player and your career, I was thinking when your career finishes, where am I going here?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I went for that role and I was successful. I knew it was going to be more demanding. And after 6 months, I remember I wasn't getting in. An offer came in from Bray and Cove to go on loan, and I was just bursting to play, Paul. At that time, I was bursting to play. I knew I could still contribute to a team. But I also knew my lifestyle in my job, we say career, was going to change as well. And I went on loan for 6 months to Cove. We probably didn't say earlier, in the mid 2000s, I was in loan at Waterford for 3 months as well.
All right, okay.
They would have been my 2 loan moves in the career, but I would have always been an asset to Cork City. When we do things, loan player, and then. Kind of that's when I kind of made my mind up that I think I've just given everything to this year now, and I want to focus in on my career outside of football, and I decided to call it a day from a playing perspective at National League.
Excellent, and I suppose looking back on it, and it's something that I've spoken to some of the other players really, and I suppose even more prominent, I suppose, in your current role is the change in football from back in that period to now. Really, like it's gone kind of full circle, even styles of play and all that kind of stuff. Did you find that yourself, kind of, I suppose, obviously being heavily involved in coaching and managing at the moment, to playing back then? And it kind of only struck me since we set up the Patreon scheme a couple of months back, watching some of the older games, how just football in general is after changing since then. Like, it's like in that game 2005, like you would have thought those two teams, two great footballing teams, Stephen Kenny, obviously the current senior manager, known for playing football, and the Cork City team the same. But even looking at that game, it seemed like quite a direct game, and I know there was a lot on the line that night, but football back then, 4-4-2 generally played quite simple, like, and now you have your, the five could be anything, 5-6 different formations, playing out from the back, full backs a lot more involved. How do you see that yourself?
Yeah, I suppose going back to the very root of it from our generation, my generation, you would have been brought up on just 4-4-2. Say when you went into structured football or club football, that's how you brought up. There was probably a very English influence to our game here. Yeah. At the time in the UK, the majority of the teams, it was pretty direct. You go from back to front and you play from there. Then that was it. But I suppose, look, there's been more access now in the game, isn't it? The European influence that came into the UK. I think that's had a big influence on players, another generation looking at the match, coaches, the way the game is, it's supposed to term no use. You trying to, it's people are trying to, go for more of a possession-based game, and trying to introduce that to maybe younger players or bring it into the national setup here as well. That's something that's been looked at for over the last 10 or 11 years here in this country. So I just think that influence. I think the game is so global. There's more access to it. People have far more influence on the quality of players they say, and coaches get influenced by that then as well. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely a positive. So I suppose kind of that brings us onto your, I suppose, current role, or really your role since you've left kind of the playing side of football and you're involved with the FEI. You're currently the manager of the under-17s. You've held a couple of previous roles. Was it the 15s, 16s you were involved in as well?
Yeah, I suppose I'm working with international teams, Paul, in some sort of capacity for over 10 years now. Yeah. The first role, so I would have worked in locally when I was working. I would have worked in the Emerging Talent Programme, which was a great grounding from a player development point of view, and as a coach as well.
So to give people an idea of the Emerging Talent, that's basically like schoolboy or Cork Schoolboys League players, isn't it? Let's say the more prominent players really from the different clubs. It's like the Cork Schoolboys League teams, like, is it?
Yeah, okay. Should I give you a real brief kind of history of it, I suppose? The programme would have started going back as far as 2006. One of the big aims was trying to improve the national game here, regarding the setup locally and regionally. So at the time, and for many years, you would have known this as well. You would have had your local team, your interleague team, or your representative team, like the league. And then the jump might be to nationals. You might have been going from Cork, you might have been going up to Dublin for trials. How many players there? And players coming from all different parts of the country doing the same setup. Yeah. So part of the programme was to try and put something in place to bridge that gap. Right. And that's why at the time there was 12 regional centres set up, right. Okay. To keep the players in the region as well, because at that time as well there was a lot of players from different counties gravitating to Dublin to go and play club football.
Yeah.
So the part was that if you were doing well with your club team, say in Mahon and Colin, the league team, you were doing well with them. Instead of making that jump straight away to try and get an international team,
I get you.
So you had lads coming from West Cork. Lads coming from East Cork. It was for the region, so it was for the so-called better players in the region to come together, try and give them an extra training session. Yeah, the coaches would say from qualified coaches, but under a national, we say program.
Yeah, excellent.
So all the centres would have been working off the same, if you want to call it, hymn sheet about how the players need to be coached, style of play you talked about earlier, basically. How we wanted to develop our younger players. And it's still going, the programme. There's been changes to it. Obviously, the National League now would take a big impact on it because, if it's been done right, the better players should be playing National League football.
Yeah.
So that said, went into that area of work, saw that develop. It's continuing to be developed, went into the coach education side of things as well. So I would dovetail my work between both. And I would have started, I suppose, with the international team. I would have been an assistant manager for 2 years as an under 15. Right. I would have done an analyst for the 17 for 2 seasons. Then I got the head coach for 3 years of the under 15 team, and going into my 5th season as the under 17 head coach.
Yeah, excellent. And I suppose you've always been deep rooted in the schoolboy era, I suppose, really, or the underage section. Is that always something that you've been conscious about, that it's an area that you really wanted to focus on, or kind of did you fall into it, or did you ever have any aspirations of kind of going on to senior football? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose I would have got a flavour of coaching, Paul, when I was 15, 16 at the time,
right?
And it was with younger players, you know what I mean, at the time. I think Mick Conroy would have got me involved with it would have been a Coca-Cola camp during the summer.
Yeah.
And they're all organised now in this day and age. But it was I loved it. I got a you want to say a draw for it. I kind of looked more at working with younger players, and even when I was playing, I always was looking at other teams, and they might have a 17 or 18-year-old in their team, and you're like going, you're kind of real quality player, especially when you're in European games, and you're like, what's the how has this player progressed so quickly, or what's his attributes, and you're just looking and you're saying, I suppose I just had a passion and draw for.
There was always a coach, and you really saw, like, was there?
There probably was, yeah, there probably was.
Do you think that helped you as a player?
Yeah, I think it would have, yeah, it would have, because I would have been still very focused on being a player when I went to when I was training and looking after yourself individually, but lots of managers would have influenced me, and lots of sessions you would have seen at the time. You would have taken. I would have always sometimes come home from a session and might have written something down that the coach did, or a practice that you did that you could still use today. Like so I just would have always had an interest, especially with the younger players, because I felt that's where we needed to do most of our work in this country. I felt that's where we were very much behind. Especially when you played in European matches, and then when in the role I was working in, I would have travelled to other European countries as well, and we've improved, like, but we still have to up the standards because it's an international game that we have here as well, like
Definitely. And I suppose in the role that you that you have had over the last couple of years, and especially with the under-17s and the underage national teams, sometimes I feel they can go under the radar a little, like, and look, that's probably just the way football is, and it's probably the same at club level as well. Your underage structures might go under the radar until players start making more of a name and they get older and so on and so forth. But I suppose you really came to the fore during the 2017 European Championships. That was 2 years ago, I think, was it? And obviously would have generated a lot of interest around that tournament. And obviously, look, everyone kind of would know the way it ended in all that. But it was fantastic for it to be, to put that team on the map and show the progression of the underage teams over the last number of years.
Yeah, that would have been the 2001 group too. That was 2018. Yeah, so that would have been like that would have been May gone, say, only 2 years ago.
Yeah,
and the group before that would have also qualified for the under-17 finals. There was very little about that, we'll say, publicly.
Yeah.
That was a group that would have had say Leo Connor in it. More Aaron Connolly would have been in that group as well. Right. But yeah, the following group, I think what kind of propelled that a little bit, like behind the scenes, Paul, we'd have been immersed in it for the last years. We would have known what was going on. A lot of players, you would have known from 11 to 12 years of age. You would have known the good work, what was being done. You would have known the area we needed to try and keep improving, as I'd say. But I just think the fact the game got showed live on television, and obviously
huge difference.
Crazy thing with the penalty situation, yeah. Probably, at the time it was a difficult time for all the players and staff, but it definitely gave a different perspective, I think, to the game. What people saw, I know they only saw one game, but some of those players that played that night now, Adamida.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on a couple of the players there: Troy Parrott, Adamida, Adam O'Reilly, Tyreek Wright. Just touching on a couple of the Cork lads. And obviously generates a lot of local interest from our point of view. But 4 lads there, that are doing really well.
Absolutely, like they were all involved since under 15s as well. Yeah. All trying to make their way now. Adam at Preston, Adamida with Norwich, Tyreek is at Aston Villa. All different careers they're having at the moment, but good lads. Do you know what I mean? Couldn't speak highly enough about them. Yeah. That was probably something that the nation would have seen that night as well, with how well they handled themselves. But it's the bigger picture. You know what I mean? Our job initially is to develop these players on international setup.
Yeah, and I suppose you touched on that game being on TV, but a lot of the reason the underage as well is getting a lot of positive attention at the moment is because the likes of Aaron Conley, playing first team at Brighton, same Adam Ida is getting in with Norwich. Troy Parrott obviously there's a huge amount of hype about Troy at the moment, doing really well at Spurs. I suppose, like you say, it's a testament to a lot of work being done, not just currently, but over the years through the system, and you feel like it's starting to kind of pay dividends.
Yeah, and I think you probably had to hear a lot of negative stuff about it for the last years, but that would never kind of not that it wouldn't got to me, but or the people I work with, because we knew there was a group, there was certain age groups that were coming through.
Yeah.
A lot of hope for, and we knew there was potential in them. And you just look at the under 21 current crop at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that.
Remember, the majority of them have been involved in the system from a young age. And listen, you've got to give a lot of credit here to the clubs they were at as well, because that's where a lot of their work was done, whether it was here in whether it was a Cork club or any other clubs around the country. And then when they go to the UK, those clubs then add a huge lot onto their development then as well, from that 15 to 17 age group. And we just add the bits then internationally. But I think that I remember being at the under 21 game against Italy, and it was a real proud game to be at, just looking at all that you'd seen at 13 or 14 and
brilliant
young lads, and you kind of seen where they are now, and they're around first teams now, and that's the big step now from them, getting into first team football and men's football, as we might use that term. So there's a lot of hope for a lot of those players.
Absolutely, it's fantastic, and I suppose the appointment then of Stephen Kenny as the national manager after being the under 21 manager, and like has probably seen a lot of the younger players coming through, and again it just has probably first of all put a bit more of a spotlight on the actual League of Ireland as a whole, and then second of all kind of as like through the underage ranks, and like even I know there's been a bit of controversy around local clubs and national clubs around the leagues, the 13s, 15s, 17s, 19s, but I'm definitely a firm believer that players are, training and playing in those environments like Colin has set up at Cork City, like almost fully professional environments, playing and training against, first of all, best players in their own region, and then playing against the best players on a national level is really, from the age of 13, can only bode well, like, can't it?
Yeah, I think so. And, like there has been a lot of work go on the last years, and I think the next 2 or 3 years are going to have a real, deep look of exactly where everything's going to be going for all the stakeholders, like regarding, the FAI, needs everything, the club code about where we're going to go with the structure, because it is a good model. It does need improving. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You can't. 2 or 3 years ago, the way it was set up, you can't expect, it had to be set up. You understand that, but in 2 or 3 years' time, we've got to be looking at other areas as well regarding the structure of it, what needs to be done for clubs, etc. And there's just, I suppose, that collaboration needs to come into place as well, Paul, with all stakeholders. But yeah, as you said there, that is the aim of it. That those players, and for years there would have been, that they get better games and coaching in their region. That's the big part of it. And they just get more. I suppose it's you can. I know you can up the contact time. A lot of clubs are doing that, but they have to be playing. They have to be playing hard matches. As well.
Yeah, and what would you touched on a while ago that a lot of your current crop of, I suppose, this season's batch, let's say, or last season's batch, would have been a lot of home based players. Now, something that has been a huge topic over the couple of podcasts that we did was, I suppose, the transition from players going to England when they're 16. We've probably seen a lot of, I suppose, a lot of arguments for both sides of it, really. Players going over at 15, 16, players going over when they're 18, 19. Where do you kind of sit on that? And, do you think that the current setups within the country kind of help players who kind of maybe take the route of staying at home at the moment? Or do you still think maybe it would be beneficial they go over younger because they're maybe in a bit more of a even enhanced kind of level.
Yeah, to be honest, Paul, from my own experience of it and then seeing it over the last 10 or 11 years, it's like every individual player is different.
Right.
And I really believe that's just from my own experience and seeing it firsthand. You have to treat every individual player and situation. You have to look at the whole picture for the player.
Yeah.
And you know, inevitably, you know, their parents themselves will make that decision. But coming back to probably what we touched on earlier, the alternative here now has got better.
Yeah.
That's the one thing, but it will need to get even more better.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Simplest way of putting it. But it has got better. Well, there are players, and I've seen it, that probably have to go away.
Yeah.
In certain situations, backgrounds, etc. And there's certain players, and I'll see it, and they're going away, and it's not my decision, and you kind of might be looking at, and you're kind of thinking, you know, they mightn't be ready. They just mightn't be ready to go. You'd be thinking, gee, if you stayed another year here, you know, maturity level.
You're not just developing as a player, but you're developing as a person and growing up. And
that's
like you said a while ago, everyone kind of reaches that at a different age, like, don't they?
That's it. And that's where I sit on it from the experience that I've been involved in and what I've seen with, you know, hundreds of players. Everyone is different.
Like, I look at the likes of, say, Alan Brown, David Myler, Kevin Doyle, Shane Long, 4 very prominent players over the last 10, 15 years for Ireland and playing Premier League and very high level in championships, doing extremely well. And they decided to go, well, maybe not decided, but they went over at a later age. And then, look, I know you have your John Egan's, your, let's say, Adam Ida at the moment that are still going over 15, 16, and they're still being very successful. But I suppose it's just the rate of players who do go over and come back probably maybe worse off from it is probably far higher than that. So obviously there's something there that's not quite right.
Yeah, I suppose that is the, you know, that's the challenge for them. But I just really come back to that point with the whole thing individually. Like, you know, the lads you mentioned there that went over later, yeah, that's been their experiences. Had the opportunities to go over earlier, maybe not, or where they were. And you'd have to ask them that themselves. But there's been a lot of lads go over younger, and things have gone well for them. And others where it hasn't. But it's just making the alternative better here. And that would be my voice to any, you know, especially parent or club with players, is, you know, looking at the whole picture for the players. You said it's the person, you know, you hear players say that when they make a decision, oh, the club really suited me. You know, there's a lot of young players that have worked and they had 4 or 5 clubs looking to sign them, and they might have went to a club where people went, you know, what are you signing there for? They mightn't have been maybe top Premiership or top Championship, and they just said, look, it just fitted they just got a good sense from it and were happy with it and did their homework on it. But that's the big thing. It's just it's a very individual choice.
Excellent. Look, Colin, really appreciate your insight into your own career and your current role at the moment, and, you know, continue the fantastic work with the young Irish players. So it's something that we'll all and hopefully enjoy within years to come. So really appreciate that.
No problem, Paul. Really enjoyed it. Pleasure.
No worries. So what we'll do now is we'll go into a couple of questions there from the fans, and might do a little game we played with Georgie last week about build your midfielder, and we'll wrap it up then. But first question here came in from Alan Mooney on Twitter, which I suppose is another topical debate, especially, you know, we like to look after our own patch down here in Cork. So the question was, why are the national teams so Dublin-centric, and what can we do to close the gap? So I'm guessing that Alan is speaking about maybe that the underage national teams might be, you know, a lot of Dublin-based players or whatever, like, you know.
Okay, well, I can only answer from the under-17 side of it here. I suppose, again, just going back to the group I would have worked with, say, from last season, I think we had about, in the squad of 22 that went away in February, there was 11 just from Dublin. Could have been outside of we'll say the capital, if you want to put it that way. And last year, I remember, I think last year's, when we hosted the European finals last year, you'd have been aware of that. Of the 20 squad, because you can only have 20 in a squad for from UEFA competitions. That's the rule. There was 9 different counties in the squad last year, so I think you got to look at every squad individually. But that's I can speak from that. I do think it has changed. You're always looking to up your standards in your own area. But what I would say for any home-based players, the way the scouting has gone here in the 4 provinces, it's never been as strong.
Brilliant, excellent. The second question is your favourite moment as a City player.
I'd say I'd have to say 2, Paul, with that.
Right.
One would definitely be making your debut.
Okay.
And then obviously the highlight was winning the league in 2005.
Excellent. And I know you went into detail about that earlier. So the next one there is the best player you played with and against.
Ooh, best player to play with. I said Patsy Frayne.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be that.
I suppose he would have been before my era. Kind of give us a taste of what would I expect.
Patsy he's just creative centre midfield player. Just really comfortable on the ball. Wouldn't be a good
he would have went against the kind of, I suppose, the typical normal combative midfielder that would have been probably known around that area, really. Like, didn't he? He wasn't exactly the biggest or the strongest.
Yeah, but he was so clever. He was 2 or 3 steps ahead of fellas. He could still other midfielders looking to go in and absolutely smash him, and he plays balls around corners. Very good off 1 and 2 touch. Very unbelievable at turning. Do you know what I mean? You think you have him, and he'd have this turn, and then everything was short. You know what I mean? And but he'd be on to you as well. He worked and everything. But yeah, he was an exceptional centre midfield player.
Brilliant. And the first against
Kevin Hunt.
Oh yeah, Georgie mentioned him actually last week as well.
Just really, really top midfielder at the time. Was that Bo's team, real strong team. Just very good at linking the play, very good at dictating the tempo of the match, hard to get close to, and just a real good decision maker. We wasn't a goal scoring midfielder now, but would have been if you want to say that link player in midfield, and always good positional play, very comfortable on the ball, very good on half turn and angles, and really good at getting the tempo up or else bringing it down. Could control the game basically. That'd be the biggest.
And the last question there is the best manager you played for and why?
I'd have to roll 2 managers in there, I'd say. I would have said at the time, I would have said it would have been a mix between Pat Dolan and Damien Richardson. Just thought that the impact both of them had, both on me and I suppose the club at the time, influenced me a lot. But I just thought Pat, from just the way, the whole professionalism he brought to the club, and then just Damien's way, very calming influence with things, and very clear in how he wanted to play. So it was, both of them would have been very good to play under.
Excellent. That wraps up our questions. So just on the last one, as a midfield player, we did this with Georgie last week. So it's a quick game. Build your perfect midfielder. So you can use either players you played with or against, and maybe look if you want to put in any players that you've coached over the last number of years that you've thought really stood out in any of these areas. We'll let you include them as well. So the first one there is passing. So maybe the best passer that you've either played with, against, or coached.
Best passer played with as a midfielder.
Yeah.
Really good that way would have been George Colin.
Okay. Strength.
Joe Gamble.
Engine.
Mark Herrick.
Brain.
Patsy Frayne.
Pace. Midfielders aren't really known for the pace, but maybe yourself.
Would he have to be a central midfielder?
Go on, give us who else would you pick? So
if you're playing across a midfield, it would have to be Ollie Cahill.
Ollie, yeah, he was rapid, wasn't he? Leadership.
Centre mid leadership. Myself.
Is that why you're such a good coach now at the moment, is it?
Yeah.
Goal scoring?
There. Goal scoring. George.
And skill?
Patsy Friend.
Okay, so you've gone passing Georgie, strength Joe Gamble, engine Mark Herrick, brain Patsy, pace Ollie Cahill, leadership yourself, goal scoring Georgie, skill Patsy Frayne. You happy with that?
Yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, that wraps up episode 8. Again, Colin, really appreciate you coming on and giving us an insight into not only your playing career but your tremendous coaching career, and long may the success continue and all that. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Pleasure. Take care.
Thanks for everybody for listening. You can watch the podcast City Talk on our YouTube channel on Rebel Army TV. You can listen and download it on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. I'd like to thank Aaron Howie on production. And next week we're going to have ex-Cork City Academy coach and current Co-Ramblers senior manager Stuart Ashton. So get your questions into us for Stuart next week. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.